Welcome to a Stepping Stones to Awareness show. I'm Caroline Stevens, and today in the studios I've got John Hurst from Wales, and he used to be in the police for 30 years, and his friend and neighbour Frazer. Frazer is also from Wales, and he spent some time in South America until 5 years ago. So welcome, John and Frazer.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Good to see you.
Yep.
And we're going to look at, is any sort of rebellion lawful? Bearing in mind we've got our yellow vests on, and we've just been watching what's happening over in Paris, and it looks a bit hairy over there.
Yeah, yes, indeed. During my 30 years police service, I was a conformist and followed orders. When I retired, I started researching the proper law, the deep law, the hidden law, and I now think differently. And I'm able to tell you that I'm not alone in that. Earlier generations would set limits on what governments can do, and there come a point in time when they rebel and it will be lawful. So I'll give you a couple of examples, shall I?
So I know, well, yes, please,
Yeah.
but talking about France and the UK,
Yep.
these are two different systems.
Two different legal systems, but the fundamental principle in human affairs is that force settles disputes. Any policeman can tell you that. You might live in a nice...
Force can settle disputes.
Well, force is the ultimate arbiter in human affairs if it comes to it, because most people behave themselves. The vast majority of the population will cooperate. 2% in particular won't, and I'm talking about psychopaths. So if you give a psychopath a gun or a psychopath a businessman suit and put him head of a corporation...
Are there only 2% psychopaths?
I followed...
Are they all in politics, by the way?
I followed Thomas Sheridan's work, so can I refer you to that? Yeah. If you look at Thomas Sheridan's work, I went to some of his lectures a few years ago and it opened my eyes.
Who is Thomas Sheridan?
Thomas Sheridan is a former punk rocker. In the 1990s, he goes across to America, and then the fashion changes, and he's stranded in America with no money, so he has to get a job. And he gets a job in Wall Street in a big bank, strangely enough. And he has a colleague who's a high functioning sociopath, which is one step down from a psychopath. A serious psychopath will be in Broadmoor as a mental home, having killed somebody with a big knife.
And what's the definition of a psychopath?
Well, there's now in recent years there's been a medical insight into them, and Thomas Sheridan's work covers this. A brain scan will identify an abnormality of mind in certain regions, which take away empathy. The
narcissistic aren't they?
Narcissism is one of the markers, a psychopath, if they can't control their urges, they'll commit a crime and be locked up or in a mental institution. There are two alternatives way of dealing with them, but they have a capacity to have a certain amount of self-awareness, and it's manifested in they observe normal behaviour and imitate it, but they get it wrong. And a good example would be Gordon Brown. We could talk about him. They also tend to have henchmen around them. They tend to be inspiring leadership. They also gaslight. There's a recent book, 50 Shades of Grey, which is novel, mainly interesting to women, and a woman's...
That's a very sexist comment. What do you mean by gaslighting?
A woman's irresistibly attracted to a successful businessman, and she doesn't know what a psychopath is, but she ends up being ill-treated and in prison and takes it on.
Because they want to control.
Yeah, and they can't help it. It's an abnormality in mind.
So it's actually medically proven there's a difference in these people's...
Yeah. And the significance of the medical research is that we have a common law-based legal system. It's based on the Saxon principle that you trust a man if he's promised to do the right thing, and that's known as an oath. Somebody that's incapable of taking an oath because of an abnormality of mind should never be in a position of trust, whether financial, fiduciary, politician, policeman, power of arrest.
So you're talking about politicians who take oaths?
Yes.
And they're the number one occupation for being psychopaths.
And that's the reason why they behave badly.
Did you say they're paid badly?
No, the reason why they behave badly.
Oh, behave badly.
That's right. So a good example is David Icke's model. I read David Icke's books, and if you read his older ones, you see that he's quite often right, which is the test of a theory. It's a scientific theory is an observation about the world that allows you to predict what's going to happen because it's happened before. And the model David Icke puts forward is that humans were hunter-gatherers for many generations. As far as Europeans are concerned, the ice sheets retreat at the end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. Agriculture develops initially in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, and it spreads. And in an agricultural society, a farmer can grow more food, more wealth than he can consume. So you end up with a surplus of value, and psychopaths then set about stealing it. The more ruthless they are, the more likely they are to rise to the top, and they could be called chieftain or king. And they equip themselves with assistants because they're only 2% of the population, and those assistants will be soldiers that go out and tax the peasants and take all their food. And they also employ priests who tell the peasants it's okay because God said so. And David Icke's books, in summary, say that he's identified 13 bloodline families which have done
Rothschild's
this.
one of them.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Dupont.
Done it for the last probably 10,000 years. And they're not criminals, strictly speaking, because a crime is two things: it's a physical act and a mental intent.
Right.
Yeah. So a person who's incapable of rational thought
and there's no
be a
empathy.
criminal. Yeah. So they
can't be a criminal.
No, they can't be a criminal, but they should be locked up in Broadmoor or somewhere similar.
Okay, so we're here in support of our fellow humans suffering in France and in Europe at the minute under Napoleonic law. Is that correct?
Well, they have the Code Napoleon, which came about as a result of the French Revolution, which was a Rothschild project. It said
the Napoleonic Code was a Rothschild.
Are you familiar with the protocols of the Elders of Zion?
No.
Okay. Well, the story is that the Rothschilds have had a worldwide intelligence system for many years, for probably about 300 years. So it's 1890, and a man who's a Rothschild's messenger is riding a horse, carrying dispatches, and he's in Austria, struck by lightning and killed dead. Killed outright. A policeman comes along and searches his saddlebags, and in it is a document which we now know as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It appears to be a manual for the Rothschilds to rule the world, and it's instructions for what to do in each country, with a view to obtaining that control, with a view to breeding the population in such a way that their intelligence is reduced, and allowing the master race, the Jews, to rule them. Isn't
this a case of, over the years, haven't the pairs of chromosomes actually reduced in number?
I'm not familiar with that. There's
because we've got 23 pairs, haven't we?
Yeah. I did biological sciences many years ago, and at that stage there was talk about 98% of DNA is junk DNA. But in recent years, if you look at genetic research, it's proved that more DNA can be activated, and it can be activated just by external stimuli like electric signals, light signals, vibration signals, and also by the power of thought. So
thinking positive thoughts.
Yes.
So it's all been pretty negative. Every king has been a psychopath by the sound of things.
So we're digressing. So is rebellion, can it ever be lawful?
Okay. Well, you might say there's an act of Parliament that says you mustn't steal, or you mustn't damage property. Well, there was a test case a few years ago. Some peace activists damaged an RAF aircraft parked in a hangar in the UK, and they were arrested. Their justification was that this aircraft's going to be flown over to Syria, I think it was, and used in an unjust war to kill people that don't deserve it. And the judge directed the jury that what the law was, which is criminal damage, is a crime. But bear in mind, a crime is two things: it's a physical act and a mental intent. So take one away, you haven't got a crime. So from the activist point of view, yes, they did the damage, but they say no, it was the right thing to do. It was a moral judgment. Now, I can guarantee that in that trial, the judge would have said to the jury, "I will tell you what the law is. Criminal Damage Act 1971 mustn't damage things that don't belong to you." Few exceptions. If there's a house on fire, you can kick the door in and go and rescue people.
Of course.
Good example. And the jury duly convicted. And the more topical one is, in fact, David Noakes, which is he sounds like a good guy. He's a student of Constitution. If you look at David Noakes being interviewed,
I interviewed him in the summer.
Oh, it's a very good material.
Yeah, on the European arrest warrant.
That's right. And he's selling a medicine. He's saving life and limb, isn't he? So he's not a bad guy, is he? There's an Act of Parliament called the Cancer Act 1939, which was the thin end of the wedge, which criminalised selling of tree bark at that stage. And people were importing South American tree bark as a cure for cancer.
Really?
Yes.
Who were these people?
And I don't know the details, but that act is still relied on. Things like the National Institute for Clinical Excellence still obtain some of their powers from this act. The Act of Parliament was almost certainly obtained by what we now know as the pharmaceutical big pharma, a cartel, wasn't it? So poor old
Well, of course, the cancer companies, they've got the chief executives on the Medical Research Council.
That's right, yeah. So the common law rule there is they're sitting in judgment in their own cause, aren't they? They're subject to legislation and restriction, but they're on the board that's making that decision. So
conflict of interest or what?
Indeed. So poor David Noakes, his partner made a speech at the AV9 conference last Sunday. Very emotional, very tearful, wasn't it, Frazer?
Yeah, it was.
Not a dry eye in the house. The problem was that, and I didn't know the case was going ahead. They didn't know about jury nullification. This is David Noakes.
This was the first thing that jumped to
So
my
I'll tell you a
mind.
story. First time I went to the Old Bailey as a policeman, not as a defendant, as a policeman. The left-hand wall is an old stone wall, and it's the remains of an ancient prison that was very, 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 very uncomfortable. The rest is a 1960s monstrosity. Big plaque there. It commemorates Bushel's case. So what's that about?
Bushel,
yeah. And you look it up. Wikipedia has quite a good article. I don't trust Wikipedia for many things, but history is, and it's not too bad in this particular example. So it's 1670, and a man called William Penn, who's a keen Quaker, has been going to the Quaker meeting house in Gracechurch Street and making speeches. The king thinks it's critical of him. So the king issues a proclamation to shut the meeting house down. It's duly nailed to the door by the town crier, because in the days when not many people could write, you had to physically tell them. That's what a town crier was for. And the notice was pinned to the door. Come Sunday morning, William Penn and his Quakers say, well, we'll have the meeting in the street. So they carry on the meeting. There weren't police forces, but there were common informers, which was citizens who informed for money. William Penn and another leading Quaker are duly put on trial for breaking the ordinance, breaking the king's rule. They're indicted by a grand jury, and if you want to know what a grand jury is, look up John Hurst on YouTube and grand
right,
juries.
we'll cover that in another section.
Separate topic. The informer gives evidence. Yes, they had this meeting, and William Penn, who happens to be a barrister and well versed in the common law, has to accept that yes, I'm a good Christian, I did it, and he turns to the jury and says, would it be just to convict me? The jury go out. 20 minutes later, they come back not guilty. The Lord Chief Justice, it's a show trial. The king's interested, throws a wobbly and says, go back to the jury room and consider. 2.5 hours later, they return, and it's still not guilty. The Lord Chief Justice then locks them up for the rest of the night. In those days, jurors were locked up without food, drink, or tobacco to speed.
Could they use the facilities?
In those days, they weren't too fussy, were they?
So it was just the night.
The bucket in the corner, if you like it.
So even in those days when the kings were ruthless psychos and all the rest of it, the jury were only locked up for one night.
And the reason they were locked up for a short period was that their families got a writ of habeas corpus, which is an application to a high court to release the body, because the incarceration was unlawful, they were released. And the reason there's a plaque on the wall at the Old Bailey is it commemorates the name of the jury foreman. He's unknown to history except for that one incident.
The Bushel.
Bushel's case. And as I say, if only David Noakes' family had known about that, they could have done something about it.
Gosh.
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
To wrap this first session up, part one, is rebellion ever lawful?
Yes. You, because a crime is a physical act and a mental intent, take away the intent. The test is, if you're accused of a crime and you're put on trial, who's on trial?
It's the police officer, because
it's
he's
the police officer that put you there,
liberty,
isn't it? So go back to the beginning of the conversation. The French system is that the Napoleonic Code is a reverse burden of proof. You're guilty unless you can talk your way out of it.
That's right.
Okay. Common law system, presumption of innocence, it means somebody has put you in that dock and accused you of something. Where are they? Prove it. And the elements of natural justice, which the test is, the first element of natural justice is you can only be accused of a crime that's known to the law, and nothing retrospective. The second is an accusation can only be proved by a live witness, not a video, not a statement. A live witness who can be cross-examined.
So they shouldn't have these video links like Melanie Shaw.
I disapprove strongly, because a jury is entitled to see the witness standing up, not sitting down, standing up in front of them. So
it's
they can
a trial by jury, isn't it?
And the third element of natural justice is any defence that the defendant puts forward has got to be considered. So he's got a justification or an explanation, the jury have got to hear it. And those are the elements of natural justice, and they're being taken away and eroded in the interest of increasing the rate of prosecution.
The selective prosecution, there is there.
Well, that's right. If you look at my video on grand jury, you'll find there's an alternative, and the alternative is that citizens can prosecute people directly without waiting for a policeman to arrest them, without using the CPS, and without the state being involved. And it's specifically a defence against corrupt officials.
Isn't this what was discussed, or what the Lord Chief Justice said at the Justice for Boys campaign?
Well, we'll talk about that separate meeting. It's a live topic, grand juries.
Okay, so the answer to the question at the end of part one is...
We're here sat in yellow.
We can rebel,
supporting
lawfully.
Yeah, we can rebel lawfully, and ultimately, if the king's beaten in a fair fight,
or the Queen,
he or she could be replaced, and it happened in 1066 in actual fact. So the transaction in 1066 is William of Normandy comes over, he beats Harold, King Harold, in a fair fight on Senlac Hill in Hastings. The Saxons had an unfortunate tradition, which was that his personal bodyguards, known as housecarls, had to fight to the last man. So close of play on the Battle of Hastings, there's a big pile of dead Saxons with the king at the bottom. William was shrewd enough he was versed in the common law as well, because England and France were joint jurisdictions. All he did was replace the dead Saxon nobles with his own nobles. So let's imagine you're a Saxon peasant in Lincolnshire, miles away. You don't have newspapers, you may not hear much about the battle. Every quarter, a lord would hold a court, and it would be a tithe court as well. So you'd have to, if you're a farmer, you'd have to give 10% of your income to the church, and you might find that your Saxon noble had been killed in the battle, and you now had a Norman. Now, if that Norman continued to rule according to the common law, that was okay, because the god of battle decided whoever won, God was on his side. That's where the rule comes from. And if the Norman continued to rule according to law, and William was shrewd enough in the early stage to do that, there's no right of lawful rebellion against him, because it's lawful. God's decided. If, however, the Norman becomes a usurper and tries to overthrow the law, as the EU has done, you've still got the right to lawful rebellion. In actual fact, it's not a right. It's not an obligation. It's compulsory.
It's self-defence almost, isn't it?
And the reason it's compulsory, every able-bodied male has got a duty to protect the king or queen's peace.
Every able-bodied male, not female.
No.
Every able-bodied male. Yeah. So, to the people back at home, I hope you've enjoyed listening. We can rebel lawfully. We're sat here in our yellow vests. We'll leave it with you. Look forward to seeing you again on Stepping Stones to Awareness. I'm Caroline Stevens, and today I've had in the studios John Hurst and Frazer Rees. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.